Somewhere in your life right now, there is a version of you waiting to be built. Not the version other people expect you to become, but the one you quietly imagine when nobody else is watching, the one who feels capable, confident, and fully in control of where their life is headed. The question is not whether that version of you is possible. The question is what it actually takes to get there. This audiobook answers that question with one simple, powerful idea: self-study. Not the kind you remember from school, forced and boring, but a different kind entirely, one you choose for yourself, built around your own goals, your own pace, and your own future. Over the next 10 chapters, you will discover why this single habit has quietly built every successful, resilient, wise person you have ever admired, and how you can start using it today, no matter where you are currently standing in life. You will learn how to unlock your mind through daily reading, how to master your time so growth actually has room to happen, how to build discipline so strong that nothing can shake it, and how to turn even your worst failures into fuel for something better. You will learn how to stay focused in a world built to distract you, how to grow stronger through your hardest seasons, and how to keep learning for the rest of your life. Stay with this book. By the end, you will not just understand what self-study is, you will know exactly how to use it to change everything. Chapter 1. Discover why self-study builds the life you want. Every person you admire, every life you consider remarkable, was built in private moments no one else witnessed. Behind every skilled doctor, every wise leader, every confident speaker, every peaceful mind, there were countless hours spent alone with a book, a problem, or a question they refused to stop chasing. Nobody hands you a transformed life. You build it, page by page, hour by hour, through the quiet act of teaching yourself what the world did not teach you. This is the truth this chapter wants you to sit with. Self-study is not a school subject. It is not something reserved for students preparing for exams. It is the single most powerful tool available to any human being who wants to change the direction of their life, starting today, starting now, without waiting for permission from anyone. Think about the life you currently live. Some parts of it you chose. Many parts of it you did not. Your habits were shaped by your environment. Your beliefs were shaped by the people around you growing up. Your fears were shaped by moments you did not choose to experience. Most of what makes up your daily existence was installed in you before you had the wisdom to question it. This is not something to feel ashamed of. It is simply the human condition. But here is the empowering part of this truth. If your current life was built by forces outside your control, your future life can be built by a force fully within your control. That force is self-study. The moment you pick up a book, watch a lesson, ask a question and search for the answer yourself, you take the pen out of the hands of circumstance and place it firmly into your own. Self-study works because it changes you at the root, not at the surface. Motivation changes your mood for a day. Inspiration changes your mood for an hour. But knowledge, real knowledge that you earned through your own effort, changes the way you see the world permanently. Once you understand something, you cannot unknow it. Once your mind expands to hold a new idea, it does not shrink back to its old size. This is why people who read consistently, who study consistently, who ask questions and search for their own answers consistently, become fundamentally different people over time. Not because they got lucky, not because they had more talent, but because they gave their mind a steady diet of growth instead of a steady diet of repetition. Consider two people living side by side, same city, same income, same starting point in life. One person spends their evenings scrolling through entertainment, watching other people's lives, consuming content that asks nothing of them and gives nothing back. The other person spends 30 minutes each evening reading something that challenges their thinking, or practicing a skill that matters to their future, or studying a subject that scares them a little because they know they are weak in it. After 1 week, the difference between these two people looks small, almost invisible. After 1 month, the gap is noticeable. After 1 year, the gap becomes a canyon. After 5 years, they are no longer living comparable lives. One person has grown a library inside their mind, the other has consumed thousands of hours of content and remembers almost none of it. This is not a story about luck. This is a story about compound growth, the same principle that grows money in an account, except here it grows inside a human mind, and the returns from that account never expire. Self-study builds the life you want because it removes your dependency on permission. Traditional education tells you what to learn, when to learn it, and how you will be tested on it. This has its place, and it built the foundation many of us needed. But real life does not follow a syllabus. Real life throws problems at you that no teacher prepared you for. It throws relationship struggles, financial pressure, career uncertainty, health scares, moments of self-doubt so heavy you feel like giving up. In these moments, the person who has trained themselves to study, research, and find answers independently has an enormous advantage over the person who was only ever taught to wait for someone else to give them the answer. Self-study builds a kind of quiet confidence that cannot be shaken easily, because you know, deep down, that whatever problem shows up in your life, you have the ability to sit down, dig in, and figure it out. There is a discipline to this that deserves respect. Self-study is not glamorous. Nobody applauds you for reading a book alone in a quiet room. Nobody congratulates you for spending an hour practicing a skill nobody else can see yet. This is precisely why so few people do it consistently, and precisely why it works so well for those who do. Anything that requires an audience to keep you motivated will fail you the moment the audience disappears. But self-study asks nothing of anyone else. It only asks you to show up, again and again, in the privacy of your own effort, and trust that the results will come, even when nobody is watching. This is a Stoic truth worth carrying with you. Marcus Aurelius did not write his private reflections for an audience. He wrote them to train his own mind, to remind himself daily of the principles he wanted to live by. He studied himself as much as he studied philosophy. This is the model worth following. Study not to impress anyone. Study to build the version of yourself capable of handling whatever life places in front of you. Let this next point settle deeply into your thinking. Self-study is not only about acquiring information, it is about building character. Every time you choose to sit down and study instead of giving in to distraction, you are practicing discipline. Every time you push through a difficult concept instead of quitting because it feels hard, you are practicing patience. Every time you research a problem instead of complaining about it, you are practicing responsibility. These are not just study habits, these are life skills. The person who becomes strong in self-study naturally becomes strong in facing life itself, because both require the same muscle, the willingness to sit with discomfort and work through it rather than run from it. Now bring this into practical terms, because wisdom without action changes nothing. Begin by identifying one area of your life you feel weak in. It could be your finances, your health, your communication skills, your career knowledge, your emotional control, anything that feels like a gap standing between you and the life you want. Do not try to fix everything at once. Choose one area, give it a name, write it down somewhere you will see it daily. This single act of naming your weakness honestly is more powerful than most people realize, because most people avoid naming their weaknesses out of fear or pride. You are choosing a different path. Next, give yourself a small, specific, repeatable study habit connected to that area. Not an hour a day, not some extreme plan you will abandon within a week. Something small enough that skipping it would feel almost silly. 10 minutes of reading. 15 minutes of practicing a skill, one video lesson, followed by 5 minutes of writing down what you learned. The size of the habit matters less than the consistency of the habit. A small habit repeated daily will always outperform a large habit attempted once and abandoned. This is not a motivational statement. It is simply how human behavior and skill development actually work. Protect this time the way you would protect an appointment with someone you deeply respect. If you would not cancel a meeting with a mentor who could change your life, Do not cancel your study time either, because in truth, that is exactly what this time is. It is a meeting with the future version of yourself, the version who has already solved the problems you are currently struggling with. Show up for that meeting daily, even when you do not feel like it, especially when you do not feel like it, because those are the days that build discipline the fastest. Track your progress, not to prove anything to anyone else, but to give yourself evidence of your own growth. Keep a simple notebook or a note on your phone. Write one sentence after each study session about what you learned or practiced. After 30 days, read back through what you wrote. You will be surprised at how much ground you covered without even feeling it happen day by day. This is the quiet nature of self-study. It rarely feels dramatic in the moment. It only reveals its full power when you look back and measure the distance traveled. Understand also that self-study will humble you before it strengthens you. You will encounter subjects that confuse you. You will feel embarrassed at how little you know about something you assumed you understood. This feeling is not a sign to quit. It is a sign that you are finally standing at the edge of real growth. Comfort and growth cannot occupy the same space. If your study sessions never challenge you, they are not building anything new. Welcome the confusion. Welcome the difficulty. It means you are stretching your mind into territory it has never occupied before. And that stretching is exactly what builds a stronger, wiser, more capable version of you. The life you want is not hiding behind luck, connections, or some external stroke of fortune waiting to arrive. It is hiding behind consistent effort applied in the direction of your own growth, day after day, in rooms where nobody is watching and nobody is clapping. Self-study puts the responsibility for your transformation directly into your own hands, and there is nothing more empowering than that realization. You do not need permission to become wiser. You do not need permission to become stronger. You do not need permission to build the skills, the confidence, and the character required to live the life you have been imagining. All you need is a decision, followed by a small, consistent action, repeated with the discipline of someone who understands that real change is built quietly, patiently, and relentlessly, one honest study session at a time. Begin today, not tomorrow, not next week, not when conditions feel more convenient. Begin today, because the version of you who begins today will always be standing further ahead than the version of you who keeps waiting for the perfect moment that never actually arrives. Chapter 2. Unlock your mind. By reading something new daily. Your mind has a shape, and that shape is not fixed. It bends and stretches based on what you feed it. Every idea you expose yourself to becomes a brick in the structure of how you think, how you see problems, and how you respond to the world around you. Most people never realize this because they never pay attention to what they consistently put into their minds. They consume the same opinions, the same conversations, the same narrow slice of information day after day, and then wonder why their thinking feels stuck in the same patterns year after year. Reading something new daily breaks this cycle. It is one of the simplest, most accessible acts available to any person, yet it carries the power to reshape an entire life over time. Understand why new information matters so much. Your brain is a pattern recognition machine. It takes everything you have read, seen, and experienced, and uses that material to predict what should happen next in any situation. If your input never changes, your predictions never improve. You will keep reaching for the same solutions to new problems, the same reactions to new challenges, the same fears in situations that actually call for courage. But when you introduce new ideas regularly, you give your brain new material to draw from. Suddenly you have more than one way to interpret a difficult conversation. You have more than one strategy for solving a problem at work. You have more than one perspective to consider before reacting emotionally to something painful. This is the real gift of daily reading. It does not just add facts to your memory, it adds options to your thinking. Notice how children absorb the world. They ask endless questions, not because they are trying to annoy the adults around them, but because their minds are hungry and open. Somewhere along the way, Most adults lose that hunger. Life gets busy, responsibilities pile up, and curiosity gets replaced by routine. But that hunger to learn something new never actually disappears. It only goes dormant. Reading daily wakes it back up. It reminds your mind what it feels like to encounter something unfamiliar and work to understand it. That feeling, uncomfortable as it sometimes is the exact feeling that keeps a mind sharp instead of letting it grow rigid with age. Consider what happens inside a person who reads something new every single day for a year. 365 new ideas, insights, stories, or pieces of knowledge enter their mind. Some of these ideas will be forgotten within days. That is normal and nothing to worry about. But a portion of them will stay. They will connect with something else the person already knows, forming a new understanding that did not exist before. Over a year, these connections multiply. The person starts noticing patterns across different areas of life. They start solving problems by borrowing ideas from completely unrelated fields. A lesson about patience learned from a book on gardening might show up months later in how they handle a difficult co-worker. A principle about resource management learned from a business book might quietly reshape how they handle their personal finances. This cross-pollination of ideas is where the real magic of reading lives, and it only happens when new material keeps entering the mind consistently. Now address the excuse that shows up in almost everyone's mind at some point: not enough time. This excuse feels true because most people imagine reading as sitting down for an hour with a thick book, and few people have an extra hour lying around in a busy day. But this image is not what daily reading needs to look like. 10 minutes with a book, one well-written article, a single chapter before bed, a few pages during a lunch break. None of these require a dramatic rearrangement of your schedule. They require a small shift in how you use moments that already exist in your day, moments currently spent scrolling without purpose or staring at a screen without absorbing anything meaningful. The person who says they have no time to read usually has time. What they lack is a decision to protect a small portion of that time for something that grows them, instead of something that simply passes the hours. Choose material that stretches you, not material that only agrees with what you already believe. It feels comfortable to read things that confirm your existing opinions. It feels safe to stay within topics you already understand well. But comfort is not where growth lives. Read something that challenges an assumption you have held for years. Read about a subject completely outside your profession. Read the perspective of someone whose life looks nothing like yours. This kind of reading might feel slower and less satisfying at first, because your brain has to work harder to process unfamiliar ideas. That extra effort is exactly the point. Muscles grow by working against resistance, and minds grow the same way, by working against unfamiliar material instead of gliding through comfortable repetition. Build a simple, sustainable system rather than relying on willpower alone. Keep a book or article ready before the moment you plan to read, so you are not wasting your limited motivation deciding what to read in the moment. Attach your reading habit to something you already do daily, such as your morning coffee, your commute, or the few minutes before you fall asleep. This attachment turns reading into a natural extension of your day rather than a separate task competing for your energy. After each reading session, write one sentence capturing the main idea you took away. This single habit does more for retention than people realize, because the act of summarizing forces your brain to actually process the material instead of letting your eyes pass over words without absorption. Expect some days to feel unproductive. You will read something and immediately forget most of it. This is not failure. This is how learning has always worked for every person who has ever built real knowledge over time. Retention is not the goal of any single reading session. Consistency across many sessions is the goal. Trust that your mind is quietly filing away fragments even when you cannot immediately recall them, and trust that these fragments will surface later, at moments when you need them most, often without you even realizing where the idea originally came from. Reading something new daily is a quiet act of rebellion against a mind that wants to stay the same. It refuses to let your thinking calcify into fixed patterns. It keeps you curious in a world that often rewards certainty over inquiry. It builds a private library inside your head that grows richer every single day you choose to add to it. One page, one idea, one small moment of unfamiliar effort at a time. Begin today with something small, a single article, a single chapter, a single idea you did not understand yesterday. This is how a mind unlocks itself, not through one dramatic breakthrough, but through the steady accumulation of new thoughts, chosen deliberately, day after day, until the person doing the reading is no longer the same person who started. Chapter 3. Master your time to create space for growth. Time is the one resource every person receives in equal measure, yet almost nobody treats it that way. You cannot earn more of it, save it for later, or borrow it from tomorrow. Once a moment passes, it is gone permanently, spent whether you intended to spend it or not. This truth sounds obvious when stated plainly, but very few people live as though they actually believe it. They treat time as something endless, something that will always be there waiting for them to finally get serious about their growth. Then years pass, and they look back wondering where all that time went, unable to point to anything meaningful built during it. Mastering your time is not about squeezing more tasks into your day. It is about protecting the hours that determine who you become. Look honestly at how a typical day disappears. Hours vanish into scrolling, into half-watched videos, into conversations that drain energy without offering anything back, into waiting rooms and traffic jams treated as dead time instead of opportunities. None of these moments feel significant on their own. A few minutes here, a few minutes there, nothing that seems worth worrying about. But add these scattered minutes together across a single day, and you often find 2, 3, sometimes 4 hours quietly slipping away unaccounted for. Multiply that across a week, a month, a year, and you begin to see the real cost. This is not a lecture about guilt. Everyone loses time this way, including the most disciplined people you admire. The difference is that disciplined people eventually notice the leak and decide to seal it, while most people never look closely enough to see it at all. Start by auditing your days honestly, without judgment, simply as an act of observation. For a few days, notice where your hours actually go, not where you assume they go. Most people are shocked by this exercise. They believe they have no free time, yet when they track their days closely, they discover pockets of time spent on things that added nothing to their life and meant nothing to them, even in the moment. This awareness alone changes behavior. You cannot fix what you refuse to look at, and once you see clearly where your time leaks, you gain the power to redirect it towards something that actually matters to the life you are trying to build. Understand that mastering time has less to do with adding more hours to study or grow, and more to do with removing the hours currently being wasted on things that do not serve you. Most people assume they need an extra hour in their day before they can start improving themselves, so they wait for that extra hour to magically appear. It never does. The hour was already there, hiding inside the time spent on distractions that gave nothing back. The person who masters their time does not wish for more hours in the day. They reclaim the hours already being lost and place them towards something worth building. Protect your energy as fiercely as you protect your schedule. Time and energy are not the same thing, and ignoring this difference is a mistake many people make. You can block out an hour for growth and still waste it completely if you approach that hour exhausted, distracted, or mentally scattered. Notice when your mind feels sharpest during the day. For some people, this is early morning, before the noise of the world fully wakes up. For others, it is late at night, once the demands of the day have quieted down. Whenever this window exists for you, protect it fiercely and use it for the work that requires your clearest thinking, not for tasks that could easily be done during a tired, distracted hour. Say no more often than feels comfortable. This single skill affects your time more than any productivity trick or scheduling method ever will. Every commitment you accept is a silent agreement, to remove that time from something else, often from something that matters more to your long-term growth than the request in front of you. Learning to say no, respectfully but firmly, to obligations that do not align with the life you are building is one of the most powerful acts of self-respect available to you. This does not mean becoming cold or disconnected from people. It means becoming intentional about which requests deserve your limited hours and which ones quietly drain them without giving anything meaningful back. Build small, protected blocks of time specifically dedicated to your growth, and treat these blocks as fixed commitments rather than flexible suggestions. A block of time that can be cancelled the moment something else feels more urgent will always eventually get cancelled, because something else will always feel urgent. Write this time into your day the same way you would write down an important meeting, and defend it with the same seriousness. This does not require hours. Even 30 minutes, protected consistently, accomplishes far more over a year than 3 unprotected hours that get sacrificed every time life gets busy. Remove friction between yourself and the activities that build your future. If your growth requires a book, keep it visible and within reach, rather than buried in a drawer. If it requires a notebook, keep it open on your desk, rather than tucked away, requiring effort to locate. Small amounts of friction are often enough to derail an intention that was never strongly rooted to begin with. The easier you make it to begin, the more consistently you will actually follow through, because willpower is a limited resource, and every ounce spent overcoming unnecessary friction is an ounce unavailable for the actual work in front of you. Understand also that rest belongs inside a well-mastered schedule, not outside of it. Time mastery is not about filling every waking moment with productivity until you collapse from exhaustion. It is about being deliberate with your hours, which includes deliberately choosing to rest so you can return to your growth with a clear, capable mind. A person who works themselves into constant fatigue is not mastering their time. They are simply spending it recklessly in a different direction, one that eventually costs them the very growth they were chasing. Every hour you reclaim from distraction and redirect toward your growth becomes a building block in the life you are constructing. This does not happen overnight, and it will not feel dramatic in the moment. But look back after a year of protected, intentional hours, and you will see a version of yourself standing far ahead of where you started, built not through more time, but through better ownership of the time you already had all along. Chapter 4. Build unshakable discipline through small daily study habits. Discipline has been misunderstood by almost everyone who has ever tried to build it. Most people picture discipline as some enormous surge of willpower, a dramatic moment where a person grits their teeth and forces themselves through sheer determination alone. This image is entertaining, but it is also false, and believing it is one of the biggest reasons people fail to build real discipline in their lives. True discipline is quiet. It does not announce itself with fireworks. It shows up in the smallest, most unremarkable moments, repeated so consistently that they eventually become the foundation of an unshakable character. If you want to understand real discipline, stop looking for the dramatic version and start paying attention to the small one, because the small one is the only version that actually lasts. Consider how most people approach a new goal. They feel a burst of motivation, and in that burst, they commit to something enormous. 2 hours of study every day. A complete life overhaul starting tomorrow morning. This enthusiasm feels wonderful in the moment, but it rarely survives contact with real life. Within a week, exhaustion sets in. Within 2 weeks, excuses start piling up. Within a month, the ambitious plan has been quietly abandoned, and the person feels worse than before they started, carrying a small wound of failure that makes the next attempt even harder to begin. This pattern repeats itself endlessly because people keep chasing the size of the commitment instead of the consistency of it. Small daily habits work because they respect a basic truth about human psychology. Your mind resists large, sudden changes. It is wired to protect the status quo, to keep you doing what you have always done, because familiar behavior feels safer than unfamiliar behavior, even when the unfamiliar behavior would clearly benefit you. A massive new commitment triggers this resistance immediately and powerfully. But a small commitment, something so modest it barely registers as a threat to your existing routine, slips past this resistance almost unnoticed. 10 minutes of study each day does not frighten your mind the way 2 hours does. This is precisely why it works. You are not trying to overpower your resistance through force. You are quietly bypassing it through size. Once a small habit is in place and repeated consistently, something remarkable begins to happen. The habit stops requiring willpower altogether. In the beginning, sitting down to study for 10 minutes might take a real act of effort. But after doing it daily for several weeks, your mind begins to expect it. It becomes part of your identity rather than a task you are forcing yourself through. You stop being someone who is trying to study and become someone who simply studies, the same way you brush your teeth without needing to talk yourself into it each morning. This shift from forced effort to natural identity is where unshakable discipline actually comes from. It is not built through force. It is built through repetition small enough to survive long enough to become automatic. Notice the word survive in that last sentence, because it carries real weight. The biggest enemy of discipline is not laziness. It is inconsistency caused by commitments too large to sustain. A habit that survives busy weeks, tired days, and low motivation mornings will always outperform a habit that only works when conditions are perfect, because conditions are rarely perfect for very long. Build your study habit around your worst days, not your best ones. Ask yourself honestly what you could realistically manage, even on a day when everything goes wrong, when you are exhausted, stressed, and short on time. Whatever that minimum is, that is your actual daily commitment. On good days, you can always do more, but the habit itself should never depend on having a good day to survive. Attach your study habit to something that already happens automatically in your life. This is one of the most effective tools for building consistency because it removes the burden of remembering and deciding from your already limited mental energy. If you already drink coffee every morning without fail, study for 10 minutes immediately after finishing it. If you already brush your teeth before bed without fail, review 1 page of notes right after. The existing habit becomes a trigger for the new one, and over time, the two become linked so tightly that skipping the new habit starts to feel strange, almost like leaving a sentence unfinished. Track your consistency, not your intensity. Keep a simple record, a check mark on a calendar, a streak counter in a notebook, anything that lets you see how many consecutive days you have shown up. This visual record becomes surprisingly powerful over time. Nobody wants to break a streak they have spent weeks building. This is not weakness or vanity. It is simply human psychology working in your favor instead of against you. The streak becomes its own motivation, separate from whatever originally inspired you to start. And this separation matters because motivation always fades eventually, while a streak, once built, tends to protect itself. Expect to miss a day eventually, because you will, and how you respond to that missed day matters more than the missed day itself. 1 skipped session is a normal part of being human. 2 skipped sessions in a row is the beginning of a pattern that can quietly unravel weeks of progress. When you miss a day, do not spend energy punishing yourself with guilt. Simply return to the habit the very next day, without drama, without needing to prove anything through an oversized session to make up for lost time. Discipline is built through returning consistently, not through never falling at all. Recognize that the size of the habit matters far less than most people assume, and the identity being built underneath it matters far more. 10 minutes of daily study, repeated for a full year, teaches your mind something no single dramatic effort ever could. It teaches you that you are someone who shows up regardless of mood, regardless of circumstance, regardless of motivation. This lesson transfers far beyond the specific subject you are studying. It becomes the quiet backbone behind every difficult thing you will ever need to do in life, because discipline built in one small area of life has a way of strengthening every other area it touches. Unshakable discipline is not born from a single powerful moment of determination. It is assembled quietly, one small daily habit at a time, stacked patiently across weeks and months, until it forms something solid enough to withstand any storm life throws at it. Begin today with something small enough to feel almost too easy, and trust that this smallness is not a weakness in your plan. It is the exact reason your plan will actually survive long enough to change you. Chapter 5. Transform failure into fuel for deeper self-learning. Every person who has ever built something meaningful in their life carries a private collection of failures behind them, failures the world rarely sees because the world only notices the finished result. The business that succeeded came after several that quietly collapsed. The skill that now looks effortless came after months of clumsy, embarrassing attempts. The confident person standing in front of a room once stood in front of smaller rooms and stumbled through their words. Failure is not the opposite of success. It is the raw material success is built from. The person who understands this stops fearing failure and starts studying it, and this single shift in perspective changes everything about how a person moves through life. Most people are taught to treat failure as something to hide, something shameful, evidence that they are not good enough, or smart enough, or capable enough. This belief gets planted early, often in classrooms where mistakes are marked in red ink and treated as things to avoid, rather than things to learn from. By the time most people reach adulthood, they have developed a deep instinct to protect themselves from failure at almost any cost, even when that protection means avoiding the very challenges that would help them grow. This instinct feels like self-protection, but it is actually self-limitation, quietly keeping people small, safe, and stagnant for their entire lives. Look closely at what failure actually is, stripped of the shame usually attached to it. Failure is simply information. It tells you that a particular approach did not work under a particular set of conditions. That is all it is. It carries no verdict about your worth as a person, no permanent judgment about your intelligence or potential. A scientist running an experiment that does not produce the expected result does not conclude they are a failure as a human being. They conclude that this particular approach needs adjustment, and they use that information to design a better experiment next time. This is exactly how failure should be treated in your own life, as data rather than as identity. The person who studies their failures gains an advantage that the person who merely avoids failure never develops. Avoiding failure keeps you safe, but it also keeps you ignorant of your own weaknesses because you never test yourself against situations difficult enough to reveal them. Studying your failures, on the other hand, hands you a detailed map of exactly where your understanding breaks down, exactly where your skills need strengthening, exactly which assumptions you have been carrying that do not hold up against reality. This map is worth more than any success could ever teach you, because success often hides your weaknesses behind good fortune, while failure exposes them directly, without any place left to hide. Bring this idea into practical terms. After any significant failure, resist the urge to immediately move on or immediately begin blaming outside circumstances. Instead, sit down and ask yourself specific questions. What exactly did not work? What assumption did you make that turned out to be wrong? What information were you missing that, if you had known it beforehand, might have changed the outcome? What is one thing you would do differently if given the same situation again? Write these answers down. This process transforms a painful experience into structured learning, and structured learning is what separates people who grow from failure from people who simply repeat the same mistakes over and over, wondering why nothing ever improves. Notice how this process requires honesty above everything else. It is tempting to answer these questions in ways that protect your ego, blaming bad luck, blaming other people, blaming circumstances beyond your control. Sometimes those factors genuinely play a role, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest in the opposite direction. But if you consistently find external explanations for every failure, you are likely avoiding a harder, more useful truth. Real growth requires the courage to ask what you specifically could have done differently, even when that answer is uncomfortable to admit. This kind of honesty with yourself is a skill, and like any skill, it strengthens the more you practice it. Understand that the sting of failure is not something to eliminate, but something to use. That uncomfortable feeling after a setback, the disappointment, the frustration, even the embarrassment, carries useful energy if you direct it correctly. Many people waste this energy on self-pity or on defending their ego to others. But that same energy, redirected toward genuine study of what went wrong, becomes fuel for improvement far more powerful than any comfortable success ever provides. Comfort rarely motivates deep change. Discomfort, handled correctly, often does. Build a personal practice of keeping a record of your failures, alongside what you learned from each one. This might feel strange at first, deliberately documenting the moments you would rather forget. But over time, this record becomes one of the most valuable things you own, because it shows you a version of your own growth that would otherwise remain invisible. Read back through it after a year, and you will see patterns you could not have noticed in the moment, repeated mistakes finally corrected, weaknesses that once tripped you up now handled with ease because you took the time to study them properly instead of simply moving past them. Recognize also that fear of failure often causes more damage than failure itself ever could. The person who never attempts anything difficult because they cannot bear the thought of failing has already failed in a quieter, more permanent way, by choosing to never find out what they were capable of. This is a harder failure to notice because it does not arrive with a single painful moment. It arrives slowly, as regret, years later, when a person looks back and realizes how much they held themselves back out of fear of something that, in truth, was never as dangerous as it felt in their imagination. Every difficult moment life throws at you carries a lesson buried inside it, waiting for someone patient enough to dig it out. Treat your failures the way a careful researcher treats a failed experiment, with curiosity instead of shame, with questions instead of excuses, with the quiet understanding that this particular attempt simply revealed information you needed in order to try again more wisely. This is how failure becomes fuel instead of damage. Not by pretending it does not hurt, but by refusing to let the hurt be the end of the story, choosing instead to extract every lesson it has to offer, and carrying that wisdom forward into the next attempt, and the one after that, until the very failures that once felt like setbacks become recognizable, in hindsight, as the exact moments your growth accelerated the most. Chapter 6. Strengthen your focus by removing daily distractions completely. Focus has quietly become one of the rarest resources in the modern world, not because people lack the ability to concentrate, but because they are surrounded by forces deliberately engineered to pull that concentration away from them. Every notification, every autoplay video, every colorful icon begging to be tapped, was designed by teams of skilled people whose entire job is to capture and hold your attention for as long as possible. Understanding this changes how you view distraction. It is not simply a personal weakness you need to feel guilty about. It is a battle being fought for your mind, often without your full awareness, and winning that battle requires more than good intentions. It requires deliberate, sometimes uncomfortable action. Consider what actually happens inside your mind when you try to study or work while distractions remain within reach. Even if you do not check your phone, its mere presence on the desk beside you occupies a portion of your mental energy. Some part of your brain remains aware of it, wondering if a message has arrived, anticipating the small hit of novelty a notification might bring. Researchers have measured this effect, finding that people perform worse on tasks requiring concentration simply by having their phone visible, even powered off, compared to having it in another room entirely. This tells you something important. Willpower alone is rarely enough to overcome distraction. The environment itself must be changed, because fighting a constant pull with willpower alone drains an energy you need for the actual work in front of you. Removing distraction completely, rather than simply trying to ignore it, respects a basic truth about the human mind. Your attention naturally moves toward whatever is easiest to access. If checking a message requires nothing more than a glance and a tap, your mind will drift toward that ease constantly, especially the moment any task becomes even slightly difficult or uncomfortable. But if reaching that same distraction requires leaving the room, or logging back into an account you deliberately logged out of, or physically retrieving a device you placed somewhere inconvenient, the friction itself becomes a barrier strong enough to interrupt the impulse before it fully forms. This is not about punishing yourself. It is about designing your environment so that focus becomes the path of least resistance instead of distraction. Begin by identifying your specific distraction triggers honestly, because they differ from person to person. For some, it is the phone, buzzing with notifications from apps built to feel urgent even when nothing urgent is actually happening. For others, it is background noise, a television playing in another room, conversations happening nearby that pull attention away from the page in front of them. For others still, it is an open browser tab, one click away from an entirely different world that has nothing to do with the task at hand. Write down the 2 or 3 distractions that consistently pull you away from focused work, because vague awareness of distraction rarely leads to real change, while specific identification gives you something concrete to act against. Once identified, remove these distractions physically rather than relying on self-control to resist them in the moment. Place your phone in a different room during study sessions, not simply on silent beside you. Close every browser tab unrelated to your current task, rather than trusting yourself not to click on the one that remains open. If background noise pulls your attention, find a quieter space, or use simple tools designed to mask distracting sound. None of these actions require special willpower. They require a small amount of preparation done once, before the distraction has a chance to pull you away, rather than an ongoing battle fought moment by moment throughout your entire session. Understand that deep focus operates differently from shallow attention, and this distinction matters enormously for anyone serious about learning. Shallow attention lets you skim a page while your mind wanders elsewhere, technically looking at words without absorbing their meaning. Deep focus requires an unbroken stretch of attention, free from interruption, long enough for your mind to fully engage with difficult material and actually process it. Every time an interruption breaks this stretch, even a brief one, your mind needs time afterward to fully return to the depth it had reached before. This means a study session broken by 10 small interruptions accomplishes far less than the same amount of time spent completely uninterrupted, even though the total minutes might look identical on a clock. Build specific blocks of protected time where distraction is not simply discouraged, but made physically impossible. Treat this time the way you would treat an important exam, a period during which outside interruption is simply not an option you allow yourself to consider. Start with a length of time that feels genuinely achievable, even 20 or 30 minutes, rather than committing to hours you are unlikely to sustain. As your ability to hold focus strengthens, much like a muscle strengthens through consistent use, you can gradually extend this window, but only after the shorter version has become comfortable and consistent. Recognize the difference between rest and distraction, because confusing the two undermines genuine focus even when you believe you are taking a healthy break. Scrolling through a phone for 5 minutes between study sessions does not actually rest your mind. It often leaves it more scattered, more restless, harder to bring back into focus than before the break began. Real rest looks different. A short walk without your phone, a few minutes of quiet breathing, simply looking out a window and letting your thoughts settle. These activities allow your mind to genuinely recover, while distraction disguised as rest only trains your brain to crave constant stimulation, making the next stretch of focused work even harder to begin. Notice how removing distraction changes more than just your study sessions. It changes the depth of every experience in your life. Conversations become richer when you are not half listening while checking a screen. Meals taste better when you are not scrolling through them without noticing what you are eating. Even rest becomes more restful when it is not constantly interrupted by the pull of notifications competing for attention that could otherwise be fully present. This is the deeper reward hidden inside the discipline of removing distraction. It does not just make you a better student. It makes you a more present person, capable of experiencing your own life instead of constantly skimming across the surface of it, distracted from the very moments that were meant to matter most. Chapter 7. Develop resilience by studying through difficult life moments. Life rarely waits for a convenient moment to test you. It does not check your calendar before sending grief, financial hardship, illness, or heartbreak into your path. These moments arrive uninvited, often when you feel least prepared to handle them, and how you respond during these periods says more about the person you are becoming than anything you do during the easy stretches of life. Most people believe resilience means simply surviving hardship, gritting their teeth until the storm passes. But a deeper kind of resilience exists, one built by people who continue learning and growing even while the storm is still raging around them. This is a harder path, but it is also the path that produces people who come out of difficulty stronger rather than merely intact. Consider what typically happens to a person during a hard season of life. Study habits collapse first. Routines fall apart. The book stays closed on the nightstand. The skill someone was building gets abandoned, quietly, without any real decision being made to stop, simply because everything feels too heavy to continue. This response feels natural and even reasonable in the moment, but it carries a hidden cost. When difficulty passes, and it always eventually passes, the person often finds themselves standing further behind than where they started, having lost not only the peace of the difficult season, but also the progress they had been building before it arrived. This does not need to be the pattern. It is possible to hold on to small threads of growth, even while everything else feels like it is unraveling. Understand that studying through difficulty does not mean pretending the difficulty does not exist, or forcing yourself into rigid discipline while ignoring genuine pain that deserves attention. That approach is not resilience. It is avoidance wearing a productive disguise, and it tends to collapse eventually, often at the worst possible moment. Real resilience through hardship means allowing yourself to feel the weight of what is happening while still keeping a small, sustainable connection to your growth alive underneath it. Not 2 hours of intense study during a season of grief, perhaps 5 minutes. Not a demanding new skill during a financial crisis, perhaps returning to something familiar and comforting that requires little energy but still moves you forward in some small way. This idea traces back to a truth ancient thinkers understood long before modern comfort softened people's expectations of life. Difficulty was never viewed by them as an interruption to a meaningful life, but as the actual material a meaningful life is built from. A person who never faces hardship never has the opportunity to discover what they are capable of enduring. The strength you assume you do not have often only reveals itself once circumstances force you to reach for it. Every difficult season you move through, even imperfectly, even slowly, adds proof to an inner record that you are someone who continues moving forward, and this record becomes something you can draw strength from the next time hardship arrives, and it will arrive again, because that is simply how life works for every person who has ever lived. Bring this into something practical you can actually use. During a hard season, lower your expectations of yourself deliberately rather than waiting for guilt to lower them for you. Decide in advance what your minimum acceptable effort looks like when everything feels overwhelming. This might be a single-page read before sleep, a 5-minute review of something you already know well, chosen specifically because it requires little new mental effort, while still keeping the habit technically alive. The goal during difficulty is not progress at your normal pace. The goal is survival of the habit itself, keeping the thread thin but unbroken, so that when the season eventually lifts, you are not starting completely from zero, rebuilding a habit that fully disappeared, but simply expanding a habit that never fully died. Notice how hardship itself often becomes a teacher, if you are willing to study it rather than simply endure it in silence. A financial struggle forces you to learn about money in a way comfort never would have demanded. A health scare forces you to learn about your own body with an urgency you never felt before. A broken relationship forces you to learn about communication, boundaries, and your own patterns with a clarity that peaceful times rarely provide. These lessons are not consolation prizes handed out to make suffering feel worthwhile. They are genuine knowledge, earned at real cost, and refusing to extract them from the experience means paying that cost without receiving anything in return. Keep a record during difficult seasons, even a brief one, capturing what you are learning as you move through them. This might feel like the last thing you want to do while struggling, and there is no obligation to force it during the heaviest moments. But when you find even a small window of clarity within a hard season, write down what the difficulty is teaching you, what strength you are discovering in yourself, what you would tell someone else facing a similar struggle. Read this record back once the season passes. It becomes proof, undeniable and specific, that you did not simply survive this difficulty. You grew through it, and that growth belongs to you permanently, regardless of how the external circumstances eventually resolved themselves. Recognize that resilience built through easy repetition alone remains untested and, in some sense, unproven. It is only when discipline meets real resistance, real pain, real exhaustion, that you discover whether the habits you built were shallow or genuinely rooted. A person who studies consistently, only when life feels comfortable, has built a fair-weather habit, useful but fragile. A person who protects even a small thread of their growth through genuine hardship has built something far stronger, a habit anchored deeply enough to survive storms, and this kind of habit becomes part of your character rather than simply part of your schedule. Every difficult chapter of your life carries the potential to either break something in you or build something in you, and the difference between these two outcomes often comes down to whether you allow the difficulty to fully stop your growth, or whether you find a small, sustainable way to keep learning, even while the hardship remains unresolved. You do not need to study your way through pain with the same intensity you would bring to an easy season. You simply need to keep the connection alive, thin as it might be, trusting that this thin thread is enough to carry you through until the season passes, leaving you not just intact, but genuinely, measurably stronger than the version of you who first walked into the storm. Chapter 8. Expand your skills by teaching yourself new abilities. Every skill you currently possess was once something you could not do at all. You were not born knowing how to read, how to speak clearly, how to solve problems, or how to perform whatever work currently earns your living. Somewhere along the way you taught yourself these abilities or allowed someone else to teach you through repetition, mistakes, and gradual improvement. This truth matters because it proves something people often forget as adults. The capacity to teach yourself a new ability never disappears. It only goes unused, buried under the assumption that learning new skills belongs to childhood or to formal classrooms, when in reality it belongs to anyone willing to sit down and begin. Think about what stops most adults from teaching themselves new abilities. It is rarely a lack of intelligence or lack of resources. Information about nearly any skill is available freely, often within seconds of searching for it. What actually stops people is the discomfort of being a beginner again. Adults grow accustomed to competence in their daily lives. They know how to do their job, how to manage their household, how to navigate their familiar routines. Stepping into a new skill means voluntarily returning to a place of clumsiness, slow progress, and visible mistakes, and this feels deeply uncomfortable to a mind that has grown used to feeling capable. This discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It is simply the entry fee every new skill demands, paid by every person who has ever become skilled at anything. Understand that teaching yourself a new ability follows a predictable shape, one that becomes far easier to endure once you know it in advance. The beginning stretch feels frustrating and slow, filled with mistakes that seem to outnumber successes. Many people quit during this stretch, mistaking normal difficulty for evidence that they lack talent. But this stretch is not a sign of failure. It is simply the natural cost of building new neural pathways, connections in your brain that did not exist before and require repeated practice to strengthen. Push through this uncomfortable beginning and something shifts. Progress starts to feel more visible. Tasks that once required intense concentration start requiring less. This shift does not happen because you suddenly gained talent you lacked before. It happens because you gave your brain enough repetition to build the pathway it needed, and this is available to nearly anyone willing to endure the uncomfortable beginning long enough to reach it. Choose skills deliberately rather than randomly, connecting them to something meaningful in your life, rather than picking something simply because it sounds impressive. A skill learned for genuine purpose, whether that purpose is career advancement, personal interest, or solving a real problem you currently face, carries far more staying power than a skill chosen only because someone else seemed to admire it. Ask yourself honestly what ability, if you possessed it fully, would meaningfully change your daily life or open a door currently closed to you. This question points you towards skills worth the real investment of time and discomfort required to build them, rather than skills you might abandon the moment initial enthusiasm fades. Break any new skill down into its smallest teachable components, rather than attempting to absorb it as one overwhelming whole. A person trying to learn a new language does not begin by attempting fluent conversation. They begin with single words, simple phrases, basic structures, building complexity gradually as each smaller piece becomes comfortable. Apply this same principle to whatever skill you are teaching yourself. Identify the smallest possible starting point, master it, then add the next small layer on top. This approach prevents the overwhelm that causes so many people to abandon new skills within their first few attempts, replacing that overwhelm with a series of small, achievable wins that build genuine momentum over time. Practice deliberately, rather than casually. There is an important difference between simply doing something repeatedly and practicing it with focused attention on improvement. A person who plays an instrument the same way every day, without ever noticing which parts they consistently get wrong, will improve slowly, if at all, because repetition alone does not guarantee growth. But a person who notices their specific weak points, focuses extra attention there, and gradually stretches themselves into slightly more difficult territory, improves at a dramatically faster rate. This kind of practice requires more mental effort than passive repetition, but it produces results that passive repetition simply cannot match, regardless of how many hours are logged. Seek feedback wherever it is available, even when receiving it feels uncomfortable. Self-teaching does not mean learning in complete isolation, refusing all outside input. It means taking primary responsibility for your own learning while still remaining open to correction from wherever it can be found, whether that is a book, a video, a community of other learners, or a person more experienced than you who is willing to offer honest observations. Feedback shortens the distance between where you currently are and where you are trying to reach, because it reveals blind spots you cannot see clearly on your own, no matter how carefully you examine your own progress. Expect plateaus, stretches of time where practice continues, but visible improvement seems to stall completely. These plateaus discourage many people into quitting because they interpret the lack of visible progress as evidence that they have reached the limit of their ability. In reality, plateaus are a normal part of nearly every skill development process, periods where your brain is consolidating everything learned so far before it becomes ready to advance further. Continue practicing consistently through these flat stretches, trusting that progress is still happening beneath the surface, even when it is not yet visible, and you will typically find that a breakthrough follows a plateau far more often than a permanent ceiling does. Recognize what happens to a person who builds the habit of teaching themselves new abilities repeatedly over the years. They stop fearing unfamiliar situations the way most people do, because they have proven to themselves again and again that unfamiliarity is simply the starting point of a process they already know how to complete. New job requirements no longer feel threatening. Unexpected challenges no longer feel impossible. This confidence does not come from already knowing everything. It comes from trusting your own proven ability to learn whatever you do not yet know, a trust built one self-taught skill at a time, until the person who once feared beginning something new becomes the person who runs toward it, curious and unafraid, knowing exactly how to turn unfamiliar difficulty into eventual mastery. Chapter 9. Cultivate wisdom by reflecting on every lesson learned. Knowledge and wisdom are not the same thing, though people often use these words as if they mean identical things. Knowledge is information, facts collected and stored, easily gained by reading a book or watching a lesson. Wisdom is something deeper, something that only forms when experience meets reflection, when a person takes what happened to them and actually sits with it long enough to understand what it means. You can live through 100 meaningful experiences and gain nothing lasting from any of them if you never pause to reflect on what they taught you. Wisdom is not handed to you by the passage of time alone. It is built deliberately through the quiet, often overlooked habit of thinking carefully about your own life. Consider how most days pass by without any real reflection at all. A person wakes up, moves through work, handles conversations, faces small frustrations and small victories, and then falls asleep, only to repeat the pattern again the next day without ever pausing to ask what any of it actually meant. Years accumulate this way, filled with experience but empty of extracted meaning. This is how a person can live for decades and still make the same mistakes repeatedly, not because they lack intelligence, but because they never took the time to sit with their experiences long enough to actually learn from them. Time alone does not create wisdom, reflection does. Understand why reflection carries such power. When something happens to you, whether it is a small daily frustration or a significant life event, your mind experiences it emotionally first, often before you have any clear understanding of what actually occurred or why. This emotional reaction is real and worth acknowledging, but it is rarely the same as understanding. Reflection creates distance between the raw emotional experience and your rational mind, giving you the space needed to examine what actually happened with more clarity than the heat of the moment ever allowed. This distance is where real lessons live, hidden just beneath the surface of an experience that felt too overwhelming to interpret clearly while it was happening. Bring this into a practical daily habit, rather than leaving it as an abstract idea. At the end of each day, set aside a few quiet minutes to look back honestly at what occurred. Ask yourself simple, direct questions. What happened today that taught me something? Where did I react in a way I am not proud of? And what triggered that reaction? What went better than expected? And what specifically caused that success? These questions do not require elaborate answers. A few honest sentences, written down or simply thought through carefully, are enough to begin extracting lessons from a day that would otherwise slip by completely unexamined, forgotten within a week, contributing nothing to your growth, despite everything it contained. Writing carries particular power in this practice that thinking alone often cannot match. When you write down a reflection, you are forced to slow your thinking enough to actually organize it into coherent thoughts, rather than letting vague impressions swirl around unclear and half-formed. Many people discover, the moment they try to write down what a difficult day taught them, that they do not yet fully understand it themselves. The act of writing forces this understanding to the surface, revealing insights that would have remained buried if the reflection stayed only inside your head. Keep this writing simple: a notebook, a private note on your phone, anything accessible enough that the habit does not become another obstacle standing between you and consistency. Notice that reflection is not the same as replaying painful moments over and over without any forward movement. This is an important distinction because some people mistake dwelling for reflecting, and the two produce entirely different results. Dwelling keeps you stuck inside an experience, reliving the same emotions repeatedly without extracting anything new. Reflection moves through an experience with purpose, seeking understanding, and then closes the loop once that understanding has been reached. If you notice yourself replaying the same memory for the 10th time without any new insight emerging, you have likely crossed from reflection into dwelling, and it may help to redirect your attention toward the specific lesson buried inside the memory, rather than the emotional weight surrounding it. Look beyond difficult moments alone, because wisdom hides inside successful moments as well, and these are often overlooked entirely. People naturally reflect more on their failures, searching for what went wrong, but rarely apply the same careful attention to their successes, assuming good outcomes need no further examination. This is a missed opportunity. When something goes well, ask yourself specifically why it worked. What decision, what preparation, what mindset contributed to that positive outcome? Understanding your successes with the same care you apply to your failures allows you to repeat what works deliberately rather than accidentally, turning lucky moments into reliable patterns you can call upon again in the future. Return periodically to older reflections, not just the most recent ones. A reflection written a year ago carries a strange kind of value when read again in the present, because it shows you a version of your own thinking from a different point in your growth. Sometimes you will read an old reflection and feel embarrassed by how little you understood at the time. This embarrassment is actually a good sign. It means you have grown since then, and that growth becomes visible only when you take the time to compare your past thinking against your present understanding. Without this record, growth remains invisible, easy to doubt, easy to forget ever happened at all. Recognize that wisdom cultivated through consistent reflection changes how you move through future situations, often in ways that feel almost instinctive rather than deliberate. A person who has spent months or years reflecting honestly on their experiences begins to recognize patterns more quickly in the moment, sensing danger or opportunity before it fully reveals itself. Drawing on a deep well of processed experience, rather than reacting blindly to whatever is directly in front of them. This is what people mean when they describe someone as wise beyond their circumstances. It rarely comes from having lived through more than everyone else. It comes from having reflected more carefully on what they lived through, turning raw experience into genuine understanding, one honest evening of quiet reflection at a time, until that understanding becomes a permanent part of how they see the world. Chapter 10. Commit to lifelong learning and change your future. You have now walked through 9 principles, each one offering a different piece of a larger picture, and every piece points toward the same final truth. Growth is not an event that happens once and then remains permanently finished. It is not a certificate you earn and hang on a wall, complete and unchanging for the rest of your life. Growth is a practice, a daily choice renewed again and again, and the moment a person decides they have learned enough, arrived enough, become finished enough, that is the exact moment their growth quietly stops, even while the rest of the world keeps moving forward around them. Committing to lifelong learning is the thread that ties every other principle in this book together, the decision that determines whether everything you have read so far becomes a permanent part of your life or simply a temporary burst of motivation that fades within a few weeks. Look at what happens to people who treat learning as something that belongs only to a specific season of life, something completed once school ends or once a certain career milestone is reached. Their growth often stalls exactly at that point, sometimes for decades. The world around them keeps changing, new challenges keep arriving, new tools and ideas keep emerging, but their internal capacity to adapt stays frozen at whatever level it reached when they stopped actively developing it. This is not a dramatic collapse. It happens quietly, almost invisibly, one comfortable year at a time, until one day such a person looks around and realizes the world has moved forward without them, not because the world excluded them, but because they stopped moving with it. Now consider the opposite kind of person, someone who never lets learning become optional, who continues asking questions and seeking understanding, regardless of their age, their current success, or how much they have already accomplished. This person does not experience the same quiet decline, because they keep actively building the capacity needed to meet whatever the future demands of them. Their advantage is not that they know more facts than everyone else. Their advantage is that they have kept the muscle of learning strong throughout their entire life, so that whatever new challenge arrives, career shifts, technological change, unexpected personal circumstances, they already possess the trained ability to adapt, because adaptation has been their consistent practice all along, rather than something they suddenly need to develop under pressure. Understand that committing to lifelong learning does not mean living in a constant state of struggle, always chasing the next achievement, never allowing yourself to feel satisfied with where you currently stand. This misunderstanding causes some people to reject the idea of continuous growth altogether, fearing it means a life that never allows contentment. But genuine lifelong learning holds both truths at once: the ability to feel deep satisfaction with your current life, while still remaining curious and open to growing further. These are not contradictions. A person can be genuinely grateful for how far they have come, while also remaining hungry to discover what more they are capable of becoming, and living inside this balance, rather than choosing one extreme over the other, is where a truly well-lived life actually takes place. Bring this commitment into something concrete you can actually build your future around. Decide, right now, that learning will remain a permanent part of your identity, not tied to any particular stage of life, not something you plan to eventually retire from once you reach some imagined finish line. This decision does not require grand declarations or dramatic promises. It simply requires continuing the small habits already described throughout this book: the daily reading, the protected study time, the honest reflection, the willingness to teach yourself new abilities, carried forward not for a few months of enthusiasm, but for the remainder of your life, adjusted as needed to fit whatever season you find yourself in. Recognize that the future you want is not waiting for you somewhere out in the distance, arriving on its own once enough time has passed. The future is built, piece by piece, through the choices you make today, tomorrow, and every day after that. Every book you finish, every skill you develop, every failure you study instead of run from, every difficult season you move through without abandoning your growth completely, becomes a brick in the structure of who you are becoming. Nobody sees this construction happening in real time. It happens quietly, day after day, mostly unnoticed, until enough time passes that the finished structure becomes undeniable, visible not just to you, but to everyone around you who watches the transformation unfold. Trust that the effort you put into your own growth compounds over time, even during the stretches when it feels like nothing is changing at all. This is one of the hardest truths to hold on to, because growth rarely announces itself clearly while it is happening. Most days will feel ordinary. Most study sessions will feel unremarkable. Most reflections will feel like small, quiet moments rather than dramatic breakthroughs. But these ordinary days, stacked consistently across months and years, produce something extraordinary in total, even though no single day within that stack ever felt extraordinary on its own. This is simply how meaningful change has always worked, for every person who has ever built a life worth being proud of. Remember that you do not need to feel fully ready before you begin, and you do not need to wait for perfect circumstances before committing to this path. The person who waits for the ideal moment to start learning, growing, and improving will wait indefinitely, because that ideal moment rarely arrives on its own. The right time to begin is simply the moment you decide to begin, imperfect circumstances and all, trusting that consistency over time will accomplish what waiting for perfect conditions never could. This book has offered you tools, principles, and a way of thinking about your own growth that places the responsibility and the power directly into your own hands. Nobody else can do this work for you, and nobody else needs to. You already carry within you everything required to become the person you have imagined becoming. patient effort applied consistently, day after day, toward a future built deliberately, rather than left to chance. Close this book not as an ending, but as a beginning, carrying forward the understanding that your growth is never truly finished, that every day offers a fresh page waiting to be filled, and that the life you are capable of building remains entirely within your reach. One committed, consistent, lifelong choice to keep learning at a time.